The past week in the West Philippine Sea has experienced a sharp increase in tensions between China and the Philippines, after the two countries reached an agreement to allow resupply missions to the BRP Sierra Madre in the second Thomas Shoal. The region had been relatively quiet. The level of tension is not historically high, but last week it was clear that the attempt to de-escalate regional tensions through the Sierra Madre truce has failed. The concern for the region is that tensions might return to their escalatory path as China makes and takes accusations across the region, but most especially against the Philippines. In April 2024, the United States deployed the new Typhoon missile system to the Philippines as part of the Salaknib exercise, but purposefully excluded it from the live-fire portion of the exercise. The U.S. Army Typhoon missile system is a land-based version of the U.S. Navy vertical launch system on its warships. Typhoon is capable of firing the ground-launched versions of the Tomahawk cruise missiles and the multi-purpose SM-6 missile. Future plans call for the launch of the U.S. hypersonic Mako missile. The U.S. Army purposefully designed the Typhoon missile system to be transportable, utilizing U.S. Air Force C-5 or C-17 transport aircraft, rather than being a fixed-site missile system. The Chinese protested the missile deployment as part of the Salaknib 2024 exercise and recommenced their protest in July. The Chinese Foreign Secretary Wang Yi and Philippine Foreign Secretary Enrique Manalo held a call where the Chinese protested that the U.S. missile deployment was destabilizing the region. Secretary Manalo asserted that the Chinese were overreacting to what the Philippines claimed was a temporary deployment of U.S. missiles in their country, and that the Chinese should not worry about this temporary deployment. If launched from islands in the Western Pacific such as Japan and Guam, as well as the Philippines, Typhoon-launched Tomahawk missiles could reach the eastern part of mainland China and potentially interfere with any operations in the Taiwan Straits. While this presents a security risk for the Philippines, the threat from Chinese missiles aimed at the country is more significant. The U.S. missile deployment does serve a legitimate purpose in the form of a pre-announced military exercise, and the Typhoon can be deployed around the world when regional tensions call for the deployment as both a deterrent and an increase in capability in a region in the case of hostilities. The Chinese have been escalating tensions with the Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan, as well as flying strategic bombers with the Russians toward Alaska in late July. Due to the escalating tensions, the Chinese have created a situation that could justify the continued deployment of Typhoon beyond the exercise time period. They are the main cause of regional tensions and the main party that can ease them. This assumes the false premise that countries in the region and commerce traversing the South China Sea seek to reject their legitimate international sovereignty over their otherwise recognized territory and freedom of navigation, thereby aligning with China's illegal territorial claims. The French Navy and the U.S. Navy also conducted a naval exercise in the Philippine Sea as part of a larger exercise that will include the Japanese as well. This is the second phase of the exercise, and the French chose to replace the crew of the French frigate FS Bretagne in Japan instead of sending the ship back to France, allowing France to maintain its naval presence in the region. The French ship has been in the Pacific since May, when it arrived for RIMPAC 2024, and has participated in a series of exercises, including French exercises with the Philippines. The Royal Australian Navy and the US Navy are participating in a maintenance exercise with a US submarine tender in the Indo-Pacific to the annoyance of China, where Australia is preparing for the arrival of a US nuclear attack submarine in the region. This is part of the AUKUS Pillar 1 agreement, which aims to supply Australia with US and United Kingdom-made nuclear attack submarines capable of countering China. The participation of France and the US in the region is a continuous protest by China against regional countries, allowing outside influences to escalate tensions in the region, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The most significant incident happened early on Monday, August 19th, when the Philippine Coast Guard dispatched 2 ships into the Sabina Shoal, which China claims despite being part of the internationally recognized Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. In spring, the Philippines caught what was suspected to be Chinese artificial island construction in the shoal. This led to the Philippines Justice Department collecting evidence to create a legal case against China for ecological damage to coral reefs and the seafloor. More significantly, the Philippines decided to maintain a constant Coast Guard presence in the Sabina Shoal to keep the Chinese away from restarting the construction. This also led the Chinese to deploy their largest Coast Guard ship to the shoal, but the Philippines have prevented China from further building an artificial island. This morning, August 19th, around 3:20 a.m. local time, the Chinese Coast Guard intercepted the two Philippine Coast Guard ships that were operating 140 kilometers, or 86 miles, from the Philippine island of Palawan and 1,300 kilometers, or 808 miles, from China's closest territory, Hainan Island. The Chinese Coast Guard ship collided with two Philippine ships, causing structural damage to both. Despite the collision, both ships managed to continue their operations without any reported injuries. According to Gan Yu, the spokesman for China's Coast Guard, the Philippine ships illegally entered Chinese waters, prompting China to implement control measures against them, presumably in compliance with China's legal claim to their illegitimate 9-line. Manila's National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea confirmed the damage to the two Philippine Coast Guard ships, stating that they were en route for a resupply mission to personnel stationed on Flat Island, part of the Spratly Islands chain. They also asserted that the Chinese Coast Guard had engaged in unlawful and aggressive maneuvers against the Philippine ships. In an attempt to control the narrative before the Philippine government could present its evidence, the Chinese state media released a video of the incident and presented their version of events. The Chinese released a short video stating that the Philippine ships ignored China's warnings and intentionally rammed the Chinese Coast Guard ship. The claim that the Philippine ships intentionally rammed the Chinese Coast Guard ship is dubious, as China's Coast Guard ships are generally larger and have more powerful engines due to their former naval status. Therefore, it is unlikely that the Philippine ships would intentionally ram a Chinese ship, especially when the Chinese ship has all the advantages of a ramming maneuver. Ramming has also been a past practice of the Chinese Coast Guard against Philippine ships. The events surrounding the U.S. missile deployment in the Philippines and the recent incident at the Sabina Shoal remain unclear. However, China stated that the Philippine Coast Guard ships illegally entered the second Thomas Shoal after the incident at the Sabina Shoal, and that this was a violation of the agreement between the two nations over the resupply of the Philippine Navy ship, the Sierra Madre. It is too early to state what the fallout will be from this latest incident, but it appears that China is back in the intimidation mode and the playing victim mode in the West Philippine Sea. It seems likely that China may have agreed to the second Thomas Shoal arrangement with the Philippines for the positive media it would give them ahead of the ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asia Nations, meeting in Laos at the end of July, which invited non-ASEAN foreign ministers from the US, Australia, Japan, India, China, and Russia to discuss the disputes in the South China Sea and the civil war in Myanmar. It appears that the Chinese were not serious about de-escalating tensions, but rather made decisions to make it look like they were compromising and allowed them to deflect criticism for being an unreasonable partner in the region. Now that the conference is over and in the rearview mirror, the Chinese have chosen to go back to business as usual in the West Philippine Sea.